Okay. So let's test the microphone. Good evening, everyone. Good evening. We're going to go ahead and get started. I'm glad everyone was able to settle down. Thank you so much for being here this evening. My name is Dr. Rossana Musetti. I'm the superintendent here in the Napa Valley Unified School District. And as you know, tonight is our informational community meeting regarding the topic of small school consolidation and what's going on in the district. Before we get started formally, we need to make one announcement to make sure that we create access to translation for those who need it.
Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. The Napa Valley Unified School District provides free interpretation services in all their sessions. So if you know of anyone needing our services, please refer them to me. I am the interpreter, hi, and I have the equipment right here available for them. Thank you. This message will be repeated in both languages. Buenas noches, damas y caballeros. El Distrito Escolar Unificado del Valle de Napa proporciona servicios de interpretación gratuitos en todas sus sesiones. Si saben de alguien que solicita los servicios, por favor, refiéranlos conmigo. Aquí están los equipos. Gracias.
Okay, so just a couple staff members who will be involved with the presentation tonight. We have with us interim Assistant Superintendent of Business Services, Dr. Paul Desario, who's here tonight, and then our Executive Director of Facilities Maintenance and Operations, Mr. Mike Pearson, who'll be also helping with the presentation along the way. So I'll go ahead and get us started. So I just want to start out by saying thank you. We appreciate this level of engagement. We're really glad. We know it's a summer evening tonight, and it's great to see that parents are this invested, and when a topic like this surfaces, that so many of you are willing to come out at the launch of summer vacation and attend here tonight and get the information firsthand. And so we really appreciate those of you that are able to make it. And then we're very certain that there's probably viewers that are watching the live stream tonight as well. The video will be archived, and we'll also be putting the presentation slides on the district's webpage, on the landing page. So in case you're worrying about copiously copying things or whatnot, know that the slides will be PDF'd and be made available probably as early as tomorrow morning when we get back in the office. So thank you for being here tonight. Just a little bit around the agenda and the expectations. So this is a complex topic, as many of you know. We're going to start out with just kind of the general why around what puts districts in predicaments or circumstances where they have to consider either school closure and or school consolidation. So we'll talk a little bit about that basic why. Then we're going to spend a substantial amount of time just explaining the district's financial conditions. It's really important for everyone to understand the financial conditions of the school district, because usually that's a component of the why. And so we're going to share with you some of the most recent budgetary information that we shared just as recent as Thursday night at the school board meeting around our budget development for the 1920 school year. And we'll also touch back to some of the things that I've learned as the new superintendent of schools around the financial conditions here in the district. So it'll be a little bit of touching back and a little bit of also demonstrating to you kind of what the plan is moving forward in terms of the finances. From there, we'll go into the topic of high interest, which is just understanding the process of school consolidation. What does that look like? Learn about the formal committee that is erected when as a school district you find yourself in these circumstances. It's called the 7-11 committee. So we'll orient everybody to what the 7-11 committee is, what is its composition, and what is a very general timeline. For us right now, it's tentative. And then we'll talk to you just sort of about the general process. I have to set a little bit of expectation in the room, because I know if you're here tonight, you probably have a lot of very, very specific questions. You might even think you're here tonight sort of advocating on behalf of your school. So I just want to manage expectations in the room. My style is to be very, very proactive in terms of communication. Thus, hopefully you saw the minute sort of the topic was surfacing, because we knew that our budget development was going to be going public, I, with a lot of intentionality, sent communication to any school that would be sort of, discussed under this topic of small schools. And we're sort of defining that as elementary schools that are less than 300 or less right now. And so it's not about being alarmist and, all of a sudden sort of ringing the fire bell around the topic, but it was just about the fact that if we were going to have a conversation and bring forth potential recommendations and erect this process that we're going to describe to people tonight, or in the school district over the course of the next couple months, and schools were going to be identified and named, I thought it was really important as your new superintendent to proactively come out in advance of that process launching and sharing with you the what and the why. Now, what's the challenge around that? What's my leadership challenge around that? Is we don't have all the specific details. I know for certain you're going to have questions that are going to beg very specific answers for which we will probably not have some answers tonight. Because tonight is really an informational around understanding the process. We will be coming back out, right? And we will be sending ongoing communication updates with specificity as the work unfolds. And that's kind of the push and pull of coming and pulling together a community meeting early at the inception of this discussion and process. Is that clear? So we're going to stop a couple of times. We're going to have a nice natural break after the district's financial conditions. At that point, we'll allow you to ask questions around the financial part. And then we'll go into the 7-11 process, what that looks like, the timeline. And then we'll have Q&A at the end around that second kind of theme of the presentation tonight, which is the school closure committee, the 7-11 process, and what that looks like. Any questions around those agenda items? Okay. So just some norms we've been using these throughout the course of the year. We've had community meetings around a lot of complex topics this year, given some of the circumstances that the school district is facing. And so these are kind of the norms that we lay out. Me and my team really try and work from a space and a position of honesty and transparency, thus the community meetings. There's positive intent. We want to assume that sort of on both sides. We know that you're here probably with a lot of passion around the issue. I'm a mom. I totally understand your passion around this topic and the future of your child's school. So we know that with that passion is a lot of positive intent. And as we advance this agenda forward, we want the room to also understand that we have positive intent as well, right? That this is all, we're trying to really do good work as we decision make for 18,000 students in the school district. That we try and be solution oriented, that we're committed to listening to each other respectfully. That we focus on problems and not necessarily individuals or people, and then we maintain a sense of humor whenever we can, and that it's important, I think, as a school district for us to be really clear, when is it input versus decision making. And tonight we'll gather some input. I'm sure that when we open up the floor, there'll be some comments, there'll be some questions. We have trustees in the room tonight, we have staff in the room, and so all of this is input for us. When there's this many people in a room, we're going to naturally walk away tonight with some input, right? But there will be other opportunities, as we'll describe through the 7-11 committee process, obviously school board meetings, there's public comment opportunities, so there's other input structures. Tonight is really about getting information out around the what, the why, and the process. And we'll make sure that after the work sort of launches formally, that we'll make sure that there's plenty of opportunity for input to be gathered, okay? No decisions are being made tonight. No decisions. You'll see the timeline around the decision making, and we'll give you a tentative timeline around when that sort of decision making moment is, okay? All right. So this work, any public opportunity I have as a school district, the school board, and let me take a quick moment to introduce the trustees that are here, actually. We have Trustee Cindy Water in the room. We have Trustee Elba Gonzalez in the room. We have Trustee Jose Hurtado in the room and Trustee Robin Jankwitz in the room. So thank you for being here. Any other board members that I missed and didn't see? Okay. So the school board in December adopted a strategic plan. I, as the new superintendent, I thought that this was really critical. The organization, I think was at a point or a juncture where it would tremendously benefit from maintaining and establishing and maintaining some focus over the course of the next 3 years. And we were, obviously, we were facing also some financial challenges. I'm sure you've read about it. I've directly communicated to all parents in the district about them and to all employees. And so at a time when a school district or any organization needs to prioritize because of internal and external pressures that it is facing, a strategic plan can be very, very useful to sort of guide the work. And so this work that we're talking about relative to school closures, which is tethered really to our budget, is really about goal 4 in our strategic plan. It's called, we have 6 goals, so this is just goal 4. Tactical, proactive, and efficient asset management. And there's 2 key initiatives in that goal which are connected to tonight's topic. Educational programs benefit from predictable and stable funding, and alignment and allocation of resources should always mirror NVUSD board priorities and goals. So this topic is nested in goal 4 of our strategic plan that the board adopted back in December. So, the why. Why consolidate small schools? Why have to come together around a very, very difficult topic? It's actually one of the most difficult and challenging topics that a superintendent and school board as a governance team would have to face. I mean, it's a challenging topic. But why would a school district find itself in a position with such a challenging topic? Why would they have to pose it or even ask it of themselves? Well, operating small elementary schools versus a larger elementary school is just, it's very simple, it's more expensive. It's more expensive. Why? Well, we spend about $500,000 in operational cost. That's an approximation and an estimate of operational cost. Whether the school is sitting at 200 or whether the school is sitting at 500, because teachers follow students. Okay, so wherever the students are, if they're spread across 2 or 3 campuses, the teachers follow where the kids are, right? If they're all on one campus, the teachers follow where the kids are. But where the cost comes is the additional administrative and operational cost for having the additional campus, okay? So, if you choose to have a small school, you're adding additional operational costs when you can consolidate on campuses because there might be space on campuses versus running that additional campus. As a district, we are driven by enrollment and ADA, right? That is, we're the only school district in the county that is driven by that. The other ones are basic aid districts, which means their state funding formula is completely different than ours. Ours is completely contingent upon enrollment, okay? And so, what every student in general, the approximation is we get approximately $10,000 per student that enrolls in the school district. And when you think about this idea of like, okay, that's the revenue side of things. On the expense side, the question is, if you're running a campus for the 200 students, when there's space at your other campuses, why accrue that additional cost when you can consolidate campuses and maximize the use of your facilities and reduce the overhead of additional operational costs and additional administration? I always like to unpack this number for folks a little bit. $500,000, what does that mean? That means you're hiring an additional principal, you're hiring additional office staff, you're hiring additional food service cafeteria worker, you're hiring additional custodial services. You've got all of the utilities costs of that facility, right? And all the maintenance and the operations of the facility. So this is not about teacher cost. This is strictly about the additional operational administrative cost to open the gates or doors of that additional campus that the district is choosing to run. Is that clear? Okay. If small schools remain open, it's a cost, right? You can start doing the math. You have declining enrollment, which means that you have seats available across the entire district. We have not every campus, but a majority. I'm not going to say every campus, but a majority of our campuses at this point have hit a point of underutilization because there's empty seats, because of the overall declining enrollment that happens to be hitting Napa Valley Unified School District very hard. But just so you know, we're not alone. I could get on the phone immediately with 10 local superintendents who are suffering the same issue. It is currently a state crisis in California. Many, many public schools, because of the cost of living, are suffering this issue and having similar meetings just like this because of the issue of declining enrollment. With that declining enrollment, there's revenue pressures, there's lots of vacancies in our facilities, and so this concept of consolidation kind of becomes the new normal when you're dealing with those circumstances. If we choose to continue to run small schools, and I'll show you the financials in a minute, you know, it's a different conversation when you're running small schools under the financial conditions we're currently existing within. And I'll lay that out for you in a moment. But it's a choice. It's a choice. And it's often a choice that will come at, you choose that versus maybe choosing other things with this financial landscape. We would say, okay, you run small schools. Well, if we're going to continue to operate small schools with all of this potential for consolidation in the district, we might have to freeze salaries across the district for all teachers and staff. We might have to raise class size so that we need less teachers, which means that, you know, that's how you start doing other cost reductions. Or you might say we have to cut particular academic programs and or enrichment programs. So they're all just a series of choices, right? Because it's a finite set of resources that are all contingent upon the revenue lever of enrollment. The other issue that districts have to think about when they find themselves in this predicament is that underutilized schools must be maintained and cleaned. And so there's cost with that. There's an additional cost with that. So that's kind of the big why. So I'm going to shift into, so what's going on with the finances then, right? And you got, did any of you read my, my district financial update? I'll see a show of hands, okay. Some of it's been captured in the local press as well. I've been taking that presentation on the road internally with various constituency groups, obviously with our school board, and most importantly also with all of our employees. We want to make sure our employees are informed as to what's going on. So just this information that I'm sharing with you is much of it came from our Thursday night presentation to the school board around the 2019-2020 budget. And so I have some key findings or key points to share with you from that budget presentation, and I'll loop it back and connect it to the small school topic in a moment. So the good news is I inherited the district with a budget that was not balanced. I didn't do the second part. And the second part is the good news, that the budget that we submitted to the school board on Thursday night is balanced. Okay? So I didn't expect applause, but I'll take it. I'll take whatever I can get. That's really important to note because what I've been sharing over the course of the last 3 or 4 months, we had a transition in the business off. I brought in Dr. Paul Desario, who actually serves as a financial advisor up and down the state with school districts that find themselves on the cusp of financial insolvency or have already been designated by the state as financially insolvent. And so he came in as our interim business official, and we quickly went to work. And we unveiled that we had a clear structural deficit in the school district, and we got really, really clear as to what was causing that structural deficit. So we're going to share that. And we've been doing work pretty much, I think, since March, pretty intensely over the course of the last 8 to 10 weeks to be able to make this first claim. Why is that a big deal? It's a big deal because that's our protective mechanism to make sure that we keep control of our school district. We have school districts around us. There's currently 6 in the state who are in financial receivership, and there's approximately 41 of them that are on the cusp of receivership. And had we not done the work of the last 10 weeks, we probably would have been one of those 41. Is that right, Paul? So Vallejo City Unified is on that list, Sacramento Unified is on that list, Oakland Unified is on that list. Several districts in the northern region of California are on that list. And we did really hard work, and I'm going to share with you some of that work. Another kind of piece of good news for us is that with that budget development work, the reserves are still low, And low reserves are a problem. That's what gets you in financial trouble. And I'll show you a couple graphs in a moment. But they are improving. So the work of the last 8 to 10 weeks did raise our reserve level just a tad, nowhere near what it needs to be, but it does indicate that the district is starting to make better decisions and moving in the right direction. And we need to implement future cuts in order to continue to ensure that this and that continue to happen for us as an organization, so that we can stay financially viable and we can continue to decision make for our students, our programs, and our families. So some of the things we need to do, we need to deal with declining enrollment. We're going to continue to have to, I'll be in Sacramento on Wednesday morning, advocating, right? We have to continue to address the fact that California is number 46 in terms of per pupil spending, and that doesn't affect districts up valley that are basic aid, but it does affect a district like ours that is based on revenue for its, enrollment for its revenue, okay? So advocacy to continue to fight low state funding is a reality. Rising pension costs, that's the gift of Governor Brown. We had an issue with the state retirement system for school employees, and Governor Brown came up with a brilliant solution. He said, have the locals pay more, the local districts, the 1,000 districts up and down the state of California, have them pay more, contribute more to make sure that when folks my age, when we retire, that the retirement system is there for us. So we are solving that problem at the local level for the state, and that means that the cost of every employee has raised by 30% for school districts. So that's a huge hit to already strained California school budgets. And then rising special education costs. What we're finding up and down the state of California, more kids are qualifying. There's just more anxiety. There's more issues that are impacting our young people. More kids are qualifying. More intense services are needed. And guess what? The state is not funding it. Right? So that's sort of the conundrum. So in order to maintain that balanced budget, and in order to continue to make progress on the reserve, we need to make sure that the recommendations of our budget proposal that we presented to the school board on Thursday night, which they will be voting on next Thursday, 3 days from now, this Thursday, we need to make sure budget recommendations are implemented. Because we can balance a budget on paper, but if we do not make some of the decisions that are going to make those numbers become real for the organization, we'll find ourselves right back in the situation where we'll be on the cusp of financial receivership. And so we're trying to avoid that at all costs, because it will be, it would break my heart if that happened here in the Napa Valley Unified School District. I don't wish it for any school district, but when you see this level of engagement, participation, and community commitment to our schools, it can be particularly disheartening for a school district to find itself in that scenario. So I'm going to work, this is that work. I'm working really hard to make sure that that doesn't happen. So why do we have to implement the recommendations, of which one is school closures and consolidation? So we'll talk about that. Why? Well, here's why. Because the enrollment's declining, and I've already said it. And it's anticipated to continue to decline. So this is an unfavorable line when we're talking about enrollment in a California public school district funded in the way that we are funded. When enrollment dramatically declines, we lose lots of revenue, and the school district has been suffering declining enrollment for a really long time. I like to always let folks know we have been a bit buffered by it because you did have an explosive area of growth in the school district, and that's in American Canyon. So American Canyon for the last couple of decades was really, really growing. No matter what was going on here in the city of Napa with cost of living and whatnot, the city of Napa schools were already starting the decline, but there was a buffer. There was sort of a protective mechanism because American Canyon schools, being part of our unified school district, their growth was balancing out the decline. That is no longer the case. Even American Canyon is declining. So enrollment in the region at large is declining. Thus, that protective mechanism, there's not a spot anywhere where we're having explosive growth right now. And so we're feeling that intensely. There's a small note here. You'll see it if you go to access the slides in the next day or two when they're made available, is that you may have heard that River School was previously a charter school, and effective July 1, they are coming on as a traditional school, no longer a charter. Sometimes, I just was on the phone with somebody today, people don't understand that charter schools are not part of the district's enrollment. So when a student enrolls in a charter school, the revenue follows the student, and that is a decline in enrollment. So if a student enrolls in a charter school for 3 years in middle school, those 3 years, that is an enrollment hit to the school district. That's just how it works in terms of regulations and math and the financial piece of it. So in the past, the school district has presented numbers that included River and our Napa Valley Language Academy, because there are two dependent charters, but we don't get revenue for those students. The charter school gets the revenue for those students, and then they build their program using the revenue that those students generate, okay? Now, the reason I note here is that we'll have to change our enrollment landscape and data, because the students from River School will now be coming back as district students, which is part of that is one contributing factor to why there are one of many contributing factors that has got our budget more towards being balanced, because all of a sudden we have an increase of students coming back to the district. Does that make sense? Yep. Okay, that's a good clarifying question. From a fiscal standpoint, they do not count. From what is our formal enrollment count submitted to the California Department of Education, they have never counted. The district at times, as I did my research on the past, has displayed enrollment slides that included NVLA and included River School, which might be a reason that it caused some of the confusion around assuming that those students are still technically, from a financial standpoint, still enrolled in the district. There are students, I'm not trying to create a line of like, these students are students. I'm just saying from a technical standpoint, because we're talking about finances right now, they do not count for revenue generation. They are not students enrolled in our school district, but they have been displayed in enrollment numbers in the past. Does that help?
Enrollment numbers, so as far as expenses are concerned for those facilities, is that something the district has incurred as well for those?
Okay, that's another really great clarifying question. I'm going to take a sip of water. No, it's fine. I'll address it quickly and I'll move on, because we have a lot of content. What has happened this year, as we have done our intense work around the budget to address what was a precarious financial situation, was we drill down in a variety of areas. And one of the areas that we drill down is to make sure that we are the authorizer of that charter, and then we have charter schools. And I wanted to make sure, my team wanted to make sure, that the charter schools were paying their sort of full fair share, and the current market rate for all of the services that they acquire from us and the rent that they pay, because essentially they lease the facility from us as a charter school. And what became unveiled in that work is that the charter schools were not really paying current market rates. So essentially, over the course of the last several years, they have been getting the facilities and the services at a below market rate. And so that's why you see in some of my communication, as part of the budget development or budget improvements, is making sure that charter schools are fully self-sufficient, right? And that we are not subsidizing any of their programs, because if we're doing that, we're doing it at the expense of our district, our students who actually still remain enrolled in the district. Is that clear? So we have corrected all that. In that correction, River Middle School came to learn that they could not afford the current price points of the various services and the new facility that they were going to be moving into. So as a consequence, River has relinquished its charter and will be starting on as a district school effective July 1. So we went down that rabbit hole just for me to say that they're not included in these numbers yet. So I just wanted full disclosure, but they will be in future enrollment data that we show once there's board action, some final board action that needs to be taken around that. Okay, so how did we avoid cuts before? How did we maybe avoid the conversation of not closing schools over the last few years? Okay, how did we avoid it? Well, we had a pretty generous reserve back in 2014. So the state requirement, just so you know, is 3%. School districts have to keep a minimum of 3%. And that's about, is that about a month of payroll? Month and a half. It's about 6 weeks of payroll, 3%. So the state says live on the edge a bit. That's why most school districts try and have above 3%, because one catastrophic event, one litigious situation, one unexpected expense that, you could think about this in terms of mapping it onto your own personal finances. 3% is a very, very low reserve. So we have actually a board policy of 7.5%. And that's healthy, right? That feels better to have a 7.5%. Some school districts have even more than that. And there's philosophies around that up and down the state. We don't need to go down that road. But for us, 3% is very tight. And if you dip under 3%, that is what triggers the state and county coming in and quickly determining, is this school district able to take care of its finances, yes or no? And if not, they will be assigned a financial advisor, and it goes as extreme as some of the districts that are negatively qualified. The governing board and the superintendent no longer have authority over their expenses. They hire someone like the fiscal advisor that Dr. Desario has served in many school districts up and down the state, and the fiscal advisor tells you what to do. So a lot of community choice and voice and staff input, it just goes away. And the advisor says you have to do this, you have to do that, because you have to get this budget right, or you're in full state receivership with the loan from California Department of Education. So you'll see here that back in 2014, we had a healthy reserve. For those of you that are in the back, it's an 8% reserve back in 2014. And then you'll see that over the last few years, we had a dramatic drop and that we've been teetering. So after the giant recession, obviously the school district was able to get back up to that board policy and hit the 8%. We had a dramatic drop in 2015 to 4%, which was the first signal. Ding, 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 ding. Whoa, our reserve really dropped there. So what does that mean? It's pretty simple. It means our expenses are greater than our revenues, and we're dipping into the savings account, right? And then you'll see slight rises and little falls and rises. The reason you have these rises and little falls is because Governor Brown, during his tenure in these years, he didn't change dramatically the per pupil spending rates, but he gave a lot of one-time money. So if you were to take the one-time money, and you never use one-time money for long-term decision-making, it's just like if you get that one-time bonus at work, right? He gave those every year, every one of these years, he gave one-time money. And so how did we avoid the cuts before? It's a combination of two things. It's a combination of relying on our reserve, and Governor Brown's one-time monies kind of kept the district afloat above that 3% over the course of these 5 years. And when you start kind of hovering in this area, this zone of reserve percentage, what's going on is you're signaling that you need to make some reductions, you need to make some changes, you have to go through some prioritization. And in this school district, this time we did add some expensive programs, despite the fact that we had a structural deficit. So in about this year, 2016, in 2015, the development work happened around that. They added the 7-period day. Have you heard about that? That's the middle school schedule, and then it's the schedule we have at just one high school, American Canyon High School, and that schedule required the school district to hire approximately 40 additional teachers. So start doing the math at a teacher that costs, we say on average with all the costs of the teacher, it's let's say on average $100,000, you see that we added a lot of teaching staff. And then simultaneously in this year's, the district expanded what's called its Teacher on Special Assignment program, the TOSA, that's our edu jargon. And those are teachers that are released out of the classroom to do work with teachers who are in the classroom or lead professional development. And the school district had over 30 of them, trying to do a big push around professional development for the Common Core. Many school districts did that. The risk of investing in those kinds of efforts during declining enrollment and where you're clearly seeing that a structural deficit is looming or right around the corner is essentially, you're probably going to have to pull those programs, right? Because they're not one-time costs. Teachers are ongoing costs. So in this time period, we added 80 to 90 teachers, which was expensive. And then I'll be really transparent. We also continued to keep small schools open during this time. And when there's a structural deficit, that's a period of time that school districts ask the question that I'm asking tonight. The what and the why of small schools and potential consolidation. Another way to look at it is we had over a $20 million reserve. And when Dr. DeSario and I got to partner and work all spring around the budget, it was really clear we were hovering around $6.5 million. So you see the district was really relying on the reserve. Another way to look at this is when we, in March, this is kind of the high level of the balanced budget sheet for any of the accountants in the room. We made $7 million in reductions. We had to make them in order to not get that negative certification. And so we enacted all of those. You read about what I did. We reduced the teachers on special assignment, put a lot of them back in the classroom. So we've cut that program by almost 60%. We were doing the work with the charter schools, right? So we had to right size some of our programs. We made cuts in food services. You'll see those listed soon. And as a consequence, we were able to balance the 19-20 year, but where we still saw deficits with the anticipated enrollment declines was in 2021 and in 21-22. And you'll see, even with $7 million in reductions, the district was facing a $5.6 million deficit in 21-22. This is serious business, folks. If I, as your superintendent, don't do something about this, I pretty much should not have my position. So I had to face this pretty seriously, thus all the communication you've been receiving, and thus all my time working on facilities and finance over the last 3 or 4 months. So we submitted a budget, and the budget has some general assumptions I want to share with you. A 7-period day is gone. It's too expensive. It's not really a sustainable instructional model in the state of California, particularly during declining enrollment times. We eliminated half of it at American Canyon High School, and unless some revenue lever comes through for them, the likelihood that that'll be sustained is unlikely. We're reducing teachers on special assignment. We cut $500,000 in food services. So there's staffing formulas to this. It's how many cafeteria workers do you need? That's based on the number of lunches served. If you're still staffing according to the number of lunches being served 8 years ago, then you're probably are overstaffed. And we found out that we were overstaffed because we have not been right-sizing all of the programs during this structural deficit spending. We created a more efficient transportation schedule, and my apologies, I've gotten some input that the messaging was a little confusing, and so we have a cleaned up kind of version of that message going out in the next day or two with clarity around the schedule. But nonetheless, the transportation schedule is more efficient. There'll be cost savings there. We had a $600,000 increase in liability insurance. The reason we put that there is because it goes back to the need for the reserve. When you have fires in the area and all of a sudden your insurance premium is going to cost $600,000 more, you can't always anticipate those kinds of things. Thus, you're in a very precarious situation with 3%. So why did it increase? Well, mostly because of the fires here in the area. So all of the insurance premiums have skyrocketed for organizations like us. I told you about special education. The identification is increasing, more services, but no additional funding from the state. On the revenue side, our enrollment's down. It's down by almost 500 kids in 2 years. Do $10,000 per student, that's a serious revenue loss. The state has given us a little bit of a bump for a cost of living adjustment, so we did get a 3.26% increase. So the budget assumes that increase from the state. And they also, Governor Newsom is following in the footsteps of Governor Brown, and he gave us a one-time $1.3 million one-time batch of money to help take the edge off that increased pension cost that I described, right? So he didn't say, we're going to take the liability off you, but he said, we'll take the edge off by giving you some one-time money this year. So he gave us $1.3 million. And then, of course, there's the assumption of River returning will help with this enrollment decline, right? Those kids coming back to the school district. Now, what else? And this is, again, I'll connect it to the topic around why you're here. The budget is balanced. Remember I said the budget is balanced, and we've made improvements on our reserve. You'll see that new graph in a minute. That was the old graph around the reserve. You'll see the new one in a moment. And the budget is balanced. Why? Because we built a budget based on data, and that data is based on some intense assumptions. We're assuming enrollment's going to continue to decline. If some miracle happens, we adjust. But right now, we see the trend. The trend has not reversed. We're going to do all kinds of things to try and disrupt that trend. But the bottom line, that has been the trend, and it's been the trend for a while now. And so we have to probably reduce about 20 teachers a year in alignment with the number of kids that are not enrolling in the school district because of overall declining enrollment. It also assumes administrative reductions. So 4 positions, I've gone down 4 positions in the last couple of weeks here at the district office, starting with my office, just having to reduce and right-size the central office as well, so administrative reductions. If we close some schools, you also get administrative reductions, right? Because that's 2 less principals, or 3 less principals, or 1 less principal, whatever the number ends up being. So administrative reductions do come when you do school consolidation and or closure. And then other cuts to reduce staffing and operational expenditures in alignment with enrollment decline. We right-size the district based on enrollment. Do we have the appropriate number of custodians? Do we have the appropriate number of food services workers? These are all staffing formulas that have to be tethered to the enrollment number. And the district hasn't had to do an intense job around maintaining those ratios. Why? Because for a long time you were a growing district. And a growing district with a growing revenue mindset doesn't have to think about those things. I have to think about them. I don't have the privilege or the luxury to not think about them. I have to think about them because I don't have an interest in seeing the district go into financial insolvency. So right-sizing the district is what we're doing. We're doing that here. I'm all about when you have to do this kind of work, it should not only impact our schools, but it has to impact the central office as well. Thus, as some natural attrition and vacancies emerge here, we're closing the position, closing the position, closing the position. That work is happening here because I believe the central office should model the model as well. And then additional cuts will be required to improve compensation. These things that I'm talking about, if we don't do them, we will have, one of the main things we'll have to do or consider, I'll have to ask the school board to consider, well, okay, if we don't do the things that we've articulated, then I'll have to ask the school board to say, well, then what are we going to do? We have to do something because it's a finite set of resources. The enrollment's down, the revenue's down, and you start having to talk about things like salary freezes. And that's a really, really, I often say a poor choice where school districts go down that route, because the minute you freeze salaries, you have a really hard time with teacher retention, you have a really hard time keeping quality employees, and you freeze for 1 year, 2 years, it's very hard to make those things up, and all of a sudden you become an organization that is underpaying its certificated, classified and administrative employees, and all of a sudden you can't compete for employees, and it impacts the overall quality of your school district, because we are 85% people, and we know you want the best teachers, the best principals, the best support staff to interface with your students, and that's really hard to do if your compensation is the lowest in the region. And that can happen quickly. So this is confusing. I will say to parents, I will say to the constituents, it's confusing. The school district's going to be talking about, we have a budget issue, and then they're going to give a raise. And they're going to say, well, how, they must not have a budget issue. They gave a raise. It's like, no, we have a budget issue, and we're having to make decisions so that we are positioned to continue to make sure that our teacher salaries, our administrative salaries, our support staff salaries can continue to compete in the market. So I like to point that out so folks don't get confused. Okay, so where's the reserve now? Well, the reserve, if we enact the assumptions that I've described, the reserve now is improved, right? After, you know, a little bit more work, we were hovering about 3.5%. We're slightly above 4% with the budget that we're asking the school board to adopt, but that budget assumes a lot of actions. And one of the actions, potential actions in that work, is school consolidation and or closure. And then this is the other way to look at it. Remember in the old one, without the assumptions, the situation I inherited, you had a $5.5 million deficit, and you didn't have the third year balanced at all. You were actually 5.6 million in the red. Now, with the assumptions that we've woven in and the recommendations we're going to bring to the school board, we are balanced for 1920, we are balanced for 2021, and we still have a $500,000 deficit in that third year, but that's dramatically better than 5.6 million. But that means putting all the actions into place, not growing teachers on special assignment, not maintaining an expensive instructional model, all of the decisions that we're kind of considering as an organization. I'm almost done.
Quick question on that slide.
Yep.
You said that 21, 22, that $500,000 deficit, does that include or not include the closures of the schools?
We have included closure of schools in the budget assumptions. So we're working from an assumption that we will be able to reduce administrative and operational costs by closing some campuses.
Okay, and since that's been factored into the budget, could you say the number of schools?
Our approximation is 2 schools. Yeah, this budget is built upon the assumption. If you go back to the number I told you, it's about $500,000 per small elementary school. We've assumed $1 million savings by closing 2 campuses, that you would generate $1 million by closing 2 campuses in the 2021 school year, not for 1920,
Yeah.
but implementation of that in 2021.
Okay, I just wanted to make sure it was reflected here.
It is, yeah, it is. Yeah.
I have a number of questions for you, but the first one goes back to enrollment levels. You mentioned that River was not in this particular projection, and you were going to be adding those numbers back in. Can you comment and describe to me where that data set comes from? I've lived here approximately 20 years, and I've noticed more home construction going up in the last 2 years compared to probably at least the 5 or indeed 10 previous. How did you arrive at those enrollment numbers, and where is that data set, and does it take into account the construction? And are we being informed by the city in terms of enrollment as permits get pulled for construction?
That's an excellent question. And we actually have a demographer, a professional demographer. That's the common practice with school districts. You hire a demographer. There are outfits and demographers that do this work just for school districts, and they do exactly that. They study all of the current enrollment data with the families that are currently here, coupled with anything that's happening in the region according to permits being pulled by the city, construction projects that are any developments that are happening in the region. So we are not demographers. We would probably not do very good job at that. We wouldn't do a good job at that because we're not professional experts in that area. So most school districts rely on a demographer. We have a hired demographer who does that work for us. Yeah, the demographic study is public information. Mm-hmm.
So I have another question, a follow-up one, and that is regarding the past.
The what? The past?
In
Okay.
terms of how the budget was made compared to what was actually spent. And one of the things that a few of us have noticed is that for the past 3 years, the amount of money budgeted for staff benefits, be they the administrative or teacher benefits, you've missed the budget by about $7 million. And in the last data set I saw, but also the previous 3 years, the budget was missed each and every year. Could you comment on why it was missed? I can understand why it might be missed 1 year because of maybe a one-time change in pension benefits or health benefits. But to miss it 3 years running, why is that?
Can you clarify for me what you mean by missed?
Well, what I mean is the actual spend exceeded what was budgeted.
Yeah.
Is what I mean by a miss.
Yeah, and you're absolutely right. You want to comment?
So
Yeah,
why is it for 3 years in my organization? I
Yeah.
should be talking to my finance. Why are we missing this?
Yeah, I love that you brought that point because the previous slide that showed the $5.6 million deficit, which is an older data set, and you probably have done your homework and looked at data sets even previous to that through budget presentations. You did see that where expenses were higher than revenues, and you'll see that we're not operating that way. Our goal is to always make sure that our expenses are under our revenues, and so you'll see we submitted to the school board a budget. You see that we're paying close attention to that. Thus, the number on the bottom gets smaller as opposed to what I showed you on the last slide. I don't know. Do you want to talk a little bit about some contributing factors to how CBOs?
Well, the first point I wanted to make on enrollment is the overall birth rate throughout the state of California, and particularly in this county, is declining rather rapidly. So that's what's really driving, and there's almost no development. In fact, the amount of construction in the region is actually, there are fewer building permits are actually declining. There may be a slight uptick here in the last year or so, but they're not anything near what they were 10 years ago. So that's on enrollment. And on the budget, I'm not quite sure. You're saying that, and I did not look back many years, but you're saying that the budget expenses exceeded.
Yeah, I'm saying that I've seen a document that was essentially a bond request, and in that there was slides showing budget lines versus actual going out back 3 years, and the most notable one was surrounding benefits paid to staff. And in each of the 3 years that we looked at it, the budget had been significantly missed. And in the last year, it was to the tune of $7 million.
I can answer that. Yeah, repeat. I can't without looking at specifically what you're talking about. So I'm going to make a general statement. But if you're talking about employee benefits, I have described to you that the district was growing its employee base at a time that it needed to be reducing its employee base. So if you're adding 90 certificated positions, you're increasing pension costs and benefit costs. So if it wasn't budgeted for in budget when doing budget development and it wasn't budgeted for, then you're going to have a disparity between your actuals and your projections.
Why in the subsequent year was that not addressed? Hey, we missed it this year. Why are we making it?
I wasn't here, so yeah, I wasn't here. I can tell you, I'm addressing it, and I'm making sure alongside my team that we need to. I'm illuminating. I'm signaling now. Hey, folks, if we don't implement these assumptions, okay, we're going to have trouble. And I'm illuminating now that you still have a structural deficit in the out year, even with my assumptions. This is how I talk. This is how I work, and this is how I interface and give information to my school board. Yep. We'll go here, then here, then here. And I'm going to repeat the question because I'm getting notices that the YouTubers can't hear us. So.
So you mentioned that this budget package is in 2 schools.
Yes.
Makes me feel as though a decision has been made because the operating costs of among the 4 schools vary from $59,000 to 1,700 per pupil. So that's big, you know, differential across the board. So we're already making some calculations there, just, you know, kind of have to.
Yeah, so the comment, I'm going to repeat for everybody. She feels as if I should have just given you the mic so I don't have to paraphrase for you. She feels that looking at this, based on the fact that I'm sharing that the assumptions are in there, that 2 schools are going to be closed and we're capturing that reduction, that it feels like the decision has been made. And then, do you want to say the second part around the per pupil? Because I don't want to.
I mean, I'm not suggesting that, but that's my concern because the operating cost per pupil per school differs from 5,900 at the lowest to 7,900 per student at the highest. So, I mean, that's a pretty big differential of almost $3,000, I don't know, $2,000 per student.
So I don't know how you're getting to that calculation. It's from an expense side, it's fairly simple. We're not looking at the per pupil revenue generated per each student. Any variance on generation of revenue is because there's a base dollar amount and then there's a supplemental amount that we get for students that are socioeconomically disadvantaged or English learners. So but on the revenue side, the number stays fairly constant. Yeah, we work, it's the simple formula for us is the additional campus costs, and this doesn't matter whether the school has 100 kids or 300 kids. For the most part, the staffing level of principal is 1, right? In that range, the custodial allocation is the same, is more or less the same. The food service is more or less the same. So it's the coupling of all of those, or adding of all of those, better stated, adding of all of those operational services at a campus that get us to 500,000. Whether there's 300 kids on the campus, 200 kids, or 100 kids on the campus.
The school accountability report card is divided with cost based on operating costs per student for each of the schools. And that's the kind of data that I'm using and that I look at, and I see that there's a differential between among these 4 schools. So that's what I was.
Do you want to help here?
I can't really answer your question, but that's really those reports that, accountability reports, that's what you're looking at. Yeah, and so I'd have to look at each one of those schools and just see how that was calculated. So I just can't answer it right off the top of my head.
Yeah, me neither. The only other thing that comes off the cuff for me too is that if there's, there might be parent funds purchasing more people at that campus. So, oh, this is on the title? Unrestricted, yeah, I'd have to look too. Yeah, I'd have to look too. Yeah.
I've just heard rumors that there were employees that stole $7 million from the school district. Do you want to comment on that?
I'll go on the record. So in all of the work, obviously, hopefully you're seeing evidence that we've been doing hard work around understanding the budget, communicating about it clearly, getting the numbers right and straight, and we have found 0 evidence of any of that type of corruption or anyone stealing money from the school district.
Thank you.
You're welcome. Yes. Oh.
Where are these kids going? Is it a lower birth rate? Or are they leaving the county? Are they going to private school? Where? Those 500 didn't pay for.
So there's here in this part of the state. So who knows what the fastest growing big city in California is? Anybody know? No, it's actually Sacramento. And here, I'm sorry, I'll speak. I really talk about. So the fastest growing city in the state is Sacramento. Why? Low housing costs. People are leaving this area, moving to Sacramento. It may not be everything. So there's outward migration from Napa County to either Texas or Sacramento or someplace, but they're leaving. And then the second issue is the birth rate is declining. The people who move are younger, so there are people left like you and me, and I know you're much younger than I am, but you and me, who don't have any children in school, and that's what's going on. And so there's not anything we can do about that until housing costs drop, and you know, at the average, you all know those costs. So that's probably, so those two things: declining birth rate, driven by lower housing costs. Now, the declining birth rate is a national issue. It's just more pronounced in California.
Okay, we have lots of questions. Let's go right here.
I just wanted to clarify that your estimates in those projections
It includes in the numbers, not in the enrollment decline slide. In this number, in this budget, we have included River Middle School coming back as a traditional school in terms of the revenue side of the budget. So that is reflected there. Yeah, we'll loop around back here.
Can you just clarify what makes us an HA district being surrounded by?
Yeah, so he's the best to describe how that works. Basic aid versus, so everyone else is basic aid in the county. We're a local control funding formula district. Dr. Desario will explain how and why.
Yeah, it's actually quite simple. The districts that are basic aid get all their funding locally. Their property taxes pay. Am I being loud enough? The property taxes in St. Helena, for example, in Calistoga, they're collected enough to fund the schools. Not true here, so we get state funding. Big difference. About 65 or 70% of our funding comes locally. The rest comes from the state. As a result, we're capped at whatever the state would provide, and it's driven by the number of students that you have. Is that clear? Okay.
So you have to hit a particular threshold. We don't hit that threshold. We haven't hit it here in Napa, in our unified school district. We haven't hit that threshold. Yes, back here.
I just wondered, is the cost of moving those students added into this because when Lobos and Salvador had to move into what's now Willow, they did a lot of building and structure stuff, so that cost.
You mean the facilities cost? So the question for everybody who's watching live, the question is be careful there at the door. Yep. The question is the facilities cost, if you're going to consolidate and close two schools, if that's what the decision ends up being, are the moving costs included in there? And we would, I don't know, you want to talk about that? No.
No, we have not included any moving costs because most of the costs should be absorbed by our facility funds, not by these general funds.
Yeah, and any construction would potentially be that, you know, you could rely on our facilities funds, you could rely on a current bond measure or a future bond measure if necessary. The Willow, I think you're referring probably to the Willow, the El Centro Salvador consolidation, and you are correct. The bond paid for the improvements on the old El Centro campus to create Willow. And the bond did pay for those facilities upgrades. But not every school closure or consolidation requires facilities construction of that degree. Yeah.
I'm just going to kind of jump on to her question. And
Okay.
questions about River. So, just to clarify, River is dropping its charter. It's becoming a Napa Unified School District school. You said that that there's been a decline in enrollment in the last 2 years, upwards of 500 students.
Yep.
But if we're essentially obtaining River's students as
Yep.
unified school students, and they're moving campuses where they are going to additionally be able to acquire more students, right? Right now, they're limited on how many students they can have at their current campus. They're going to move to the new campus and are allowed to have more students. How does that not offset the last 2 years of students?
It does.
Okay.
Yeah, that's how you got from $5.6 million deficit to a much smaller deficit. That's helped with that.
I'm also curious if they're moving campuses to a larger campus where they can acquire more students. I don't understand how that financially makes sense. Moving campuses, essentially acquiring more employees, spending more money, right?
No, they had their own.
Staff gonna move over?
Yeah, they had their own employees.
No,
Yeah.
I understand that. But
Yeah.
they're gonna need more staff, right?
No.
So you're just gonna take on more students for the same amount of staff?
So there's a couple confounding issues there. So more students, they'll probably, if they grow more as a district school, then those students might be coming back from private schools, or they might be kids coming from the other middle schools. So they're kids just shuffling and moving around in the district, but it's not all of a sudden, River's got 150 extra seats, 150 new kids are coming into Napa Valley Unified. So what that means is that if kids are shifting, we staff according to where the kids end up landing. Does that make sense?
It does make sense. I just didn't, you had said originally
I know, that was confusing.
But you're saying that they
They're included in the financials. I just showed you enrollment slide of declining enrollment that until the board takes formal action on Thursday night and it's all formal, I'm not going to, we haven't updated our enrollment number and slide based on that. But we did put that assumption in the financials. Okay? Yeah. Hi.
I have two completely different questions.
Okay.
One is, so say you close school number one.
Yeah.
Are you going to sell off that property and sell the land and then have that money come in to help with any of this,
Yeah.
of these projections?
So we're going to talk about that when I get to the 7-Eleven, but just FYI, I'll just respond to part of that now, is that the sale of a capital asset like a property, those dollars, that sale generates revenue for the school district, but it's not all of a sudden general fund dollars that we get to use for whatever. It has to go back into a fund restricted for facilities, capital improvements. So that money has to come back, and its repurposing is around capital improvements. So I can't use it for academic programs. So.
It could then essentially help with those line items down the road, right?
It helps in the sense that if we currently have to make a substantial general fund contribution to our deferred maintenance or to our construction projects, sure. Does it help in the sense that now all of a sudden the restricted facilities fund has more money and there's less reliance on the general fund? Sure, there's a help there.
Okay.
Yeah.
And,
Second one, yes.
totally unrelated, if you could please explain, I'm not understanding the difference between the River Charter and the Stonebridge Charter.
Okay.
One would be full, but not, I'm sorry.
Why one would be.
Why River's charter would be full, but not Stonebridge.
Okay, we did not pull their charter.
Not full, but
They decided to relinquish their charter. So let me clarify that. I think what would be helpful, and I think what the question is what's the difference between River and the Napa Valley Language Academy, which is another charter in the school district. They both are what are described as dependent charter schools. And then Stonebridge, which is a third charter in the district that we authorize, which is an independent charter. I'll explain the distinction, and that might get at what I think your question's asking. Yeah, so the dependent charters essentially it's what it means. They're more dependent on the school district. And the NVLA and River, previously as a charter school, they used our employees. So all of the employees at NVLA and at River Charter School are NVUSD employees. What does that mean? That means when NVUSD gives a 3% raise, they have to pay for a 3% raise. That means that they have to buy our employees at whatever rate they cost for us. And guess what? They're expensive. And we have to pay their STRS, their retirement. I already told you that, right? So the dependent charters don't have a lot of flexibility because they rely on our employees, and our employees are expensive. One of the ways that charters survive California school finance roller coaster is that they're often non-unionized, and they're often not part of a district salary schedule and or contract, which gives them the flexibility to say, wow, we have a financial issue, let's lower salaries by 10%. Or let's release all the teachers we currently have and hire all brand new teachers at a lower rate. Once you get into our unionized contractual environment, that flexibility is gone. So NVLA and River, because they're dependent in the sense that they use our employees, don't have a lot of financial flexibility that traditionally a charter school would have. Stonebridge is independent, and they're not our unionized contractual employees. So their salaries can be slightly lower than ours. They can be more adaptive, like a lot of charter schools in California, because they're not relying on the school district to provide their employees. Now, River, when it was at this juncture, they could have chosen to go independent. But their teachers would have had to give up their unionized job, all the employees, the teacher, the principal, they would have said, we're walking away from our unionized job, our years of retirement in the retirement system, we're going independent, and we're going to run this charter school and be employees at this charter school.
Being independent, does that mean the district still helps with their facility for Stonebridge?
Our job is to provide charter schools a reasonably equivalent facility to other schools in the district, and we have to charge them rent. And the school district has to make sure that they're charging current market rate rent. And that's what the school district, this budget assumes that. Yep.
Hi, quick question that kind of tags along with this. So if NVLA is still independent charter, I believe at the budget part of the discussion on last Thursday, they talked about that they might not be keeping their charter going forward. Is that something that has been taken into consideration in these numbers?
The question, okay. Yeah. The question is NVLA coming back as a district school essentially assumed in this budget? The answer is no. That would be incredibly presumptuous of us. But charters, just like River, they're finding themselves in a financially challenging situation because we are holding the charters accountable to paying the full true cost of what it costs to run a local education agency. We can't give them any under market rates because it would be at the expense of our revenue, and so we can't do that. And so we've made sure of that. Now, what our job is as an authorizer, it's our job to make sure that the charter school stays financially solvent. If they're not, we have to notice them, and we have to say, we have to ring the bell and say, hey, there's a problem here. You have to become financially solvent. If not, the authorizer can relinquish and take away revoke is what the word is. Revoke the charter, okay? So River, we didn't revoke their charter. On their own, they saw the financial pressures and they have relinquished their charter and have come back into the district fold. Napa Valley Language Academy is currently facing its financial reality, and they probably have a decision to make. They have a decision to make over the course of the next year around what their future is. Our budget does not assume them coming back.
Okay. And then just one more quick thing with the SARs and the cost per pupil.
Yeah.
I actually did put those all in a little spreadsheet if you wanted to.
Oh, yeah. We got spreadsheet experts. We'll load it up. Yeah. But we'll look at that. Yep. We have a clarifying question on charter.
What would the impact be if, what is the exact impact of River? Do you know that number? And then what would the estimate impact be of the Napa Valley Language Academy?
So River coming back, it was 900,000?
Their reserve became our reserve.
Yeah. So about $900,000 in new revenue for the school district. And so one-time revenue. And so then with Napa Valley Language Academy, they're not quite 2 times the size of River. They're approximately 700, and River was slightly under 400. So you can see from there what would potentially be. After the cost, it was 900,000, right? Here.
I don't want to get too much detail here because we'd have to spend a lot of time looking at it. But they have a 1-year agreement with us where they're going to continue their staffing levels. So we're going to spend some money for them for the first year, and then the second year, when they actually come really a full-time school, we'll probably realize some fewer teachers and a little bit of cost savings on them. But right now they're basically probably around break even. Right, we do, but we're spending a lot of that revenue just on that school.
Yeah, and I think something to note, which is a challenge for us, it was a benefit to bring them back in terms of, there's a benefit, right, because it helps reverse some of the enrollment decline, But it is now running and operating a smaller middle school, so there's that tension. But kind of all those decisions were, I kind of inherited them kind of in the middle of them being, live and active, so. Okay, I'll take the question in the back.
So I'm the treasurer at the.
Yes, hi, I remember who you are.
And
You're at Mount George. I interrupted her. She's the treasurer at the Mount George PTO,
And I'm
or
sure
PTA.
it's true of really all of the small schools, but the Mount George Parent Club raises roughly $100,000 a year to support the school. And I'm first curious whether the numbers up there sort of reflect the fact that most of that $100,000 goes to reimburse the district for various things. So does the cost that you calculate
Yeah, parent donations. If it's on the books.
Yeah, if it comes through our books, we count it. So if you have funded something, bought something for your school, and we know about it, then we would count it.
you're billing me and
Yes, and are you paying your bills?
So my second part of that is knowing that we might close in 2021, how do I advise my parent community? Should I tell them we should raise another $100,000 to give back to the district? Or should I say maybe we should hold off?
I would understand as a parent club that conundrum. I think that's a challenging question, and I think that's up to PTOs and their boards to decide. I wouldn't give any specific advice on that because there's just still too many unknowns. And so as the situation unfolds and we continue to communicate about it, PTOs will have access to that information, and then they'll have to decision make as a sort of a nonprofit or nonprofit entity on what makes sense for their organization. So it's not my job to advise PTOs, but I understand that, and I understand kind of wanting a recommendation from me, but it's really the job of that governing body to determine what to do next with the information they have at the time. The gentleman in the back with your hand up?
Where the number 300 came from for the small school and 300
Yeah.
size school versus rural.
Yeah, it's just it's a standard practice. Like in practice, I would say in the field, we tend to define less than 300 as a small elementary school. Do you, right?
I think there's also there's some board policy on that too. In this district has a board policy, and I believe it's defined at around 300. So, as a small school.
Any case studies on districts that have successfully maintained small schools?
There are, but generally,
Funding models that they went to?
yeah, they generally go to things like parcel taxes, race taxes, or their basic aid. So they'd have to, and it's very, I defined it earlier, which means that property taxes in the community pay for your schools. And so, for example, in some school districts like Palo Alto, they probably get $20,000 a student rather than $10,000. So in that case, that might be a reason to keep it open. Or pass a special tax, which takes 2/3 vote to keep some schools open. That's pretty rare. That may have only happened once or twice in the state because the average voter doesn't want to vote for what they see as inefficiencies. So those are the two models I've seen. Now, if you go back east out of the state, you'll see some of the same effects where they have high, like in New Jersey and New York and Connecticut, where there are very, very high property taxes paid to schools. They may keep smaller schools open.
Yeah, it's really correlated to the financials often. So yeah, there are small schools up and down, small high schools, small middle schools, small elementary schools all over the country, but it's usually tethered to the financial landscape of the district that they're nested within.
We're a reasonably wealthy community compared to most. Enrollment will continue to decline unless we continue to close schools. What other financial processes can we go through to fund?
Yeah, the one for this kind of an effort would be a parcel tax. Takes 2/3 majority vote, 66%, like Dr. Desario had mentioned. That's typically, it's a programmatic tax. Bonds fund facilities only, local communities pass parcels for their own programmatic desires. So we want a super low counselor to student ratio, be way below the state average. You can go to Palo Alto, you can go to Berkeley Unified, they have that. They don't have it because of the state, they have it because they pass parcels and the locals pay the parcels to sustain that. That would be, a parcel would make sense for something like a small school initiative. I'll go right behind him.
So you said you do not consider the amount of kids in those schools. So it doesn't matter if there's 100 kids or if there's 250 kids in those. Do you?
We will, and I'm gonna, if I get to the 7-Eleven piece, I will just. Oh, I'm sorry. The question is that I said we don't count the number of kids as a variable when we're talking about small schools, like whether one has 100 or 200. I'm sorry if that was misinterpreted. What I meant by my statement was if a school has 200 versus 300, in general, the operational costs stay more or less in the same range. Why? We're talking one principal. We're talking 1.5 custodians. Like, there's not a huge deviation in terms of the base staffing that you got to allocate to a school to be able to open its doors.
So what are you going to look at? When you look at
I'm going to get to that if I can get past the financial piece. Yeah, yeah.
grade level?
We're gonna. I'll show you the data points. Yep, yep. Back here. Hi.
I'm the PTA president for Yountville Elementary School, and my question is sort of about the decision-making process, which I know you're trying to get to.
Yes.
My question is specific, because I do see that our mayor is here, and I know that.
Where's John? Did he sneak in here? Where is he? Oh, hey, John.
I'm going to be able to articulate this question a little bit better than I can.
Okay.
It's specific to, are you going to be looking at the closure and how it actually will affect the town of Yountville? If Yountville was decided on as one of the schools to close, it's affecting more than just the students. We also have an entire town that will be impacted by it. I know specifically I'm thinking of the aftercare program, which is run by the town, the summer camp program, which is run by the town. We've got people that are working there, people that are assisting there. We have,
Yeah.
we have our Little League, which is really fed by that school, which will be losing it.
Yeah, so I'll summarize. Can I summarize so everyone can hear you? So the question is will the 7-Eleven committee that I'll eventually describe, will they be considering other factors like the impact of closing the school on a particular community? And the question on the table is the impact on Yountville, given that after-school care is supported by the town. There's a close connection between things like the Little League, which is connected to the campus and the town, and will we be looking at kind of that as a variable? The 7-Eleven committee can ask for those things, and when I get to 7-Eleven and describe the process, they do things like go visit schools as a potential additional activity besides just the Brown Act meetings of the 7-Eleven committee, and that's where that kind of content gets captured. So yeah, they'll look at school profiles and think about the facilities and where they're located, and some of the folks have talked about zoning and all those kinds of things. They look at that, and we have a professional expert. I don't facilitate this committee. We bring in a professional expert who does school closures and 7-Eleven committees. He's here tonight, Dominic. And alongside usually some legal counsel that will help facilitate it to make sure that it's following the process and looking at the various variables.
Okay, and then going along with that, so it's also going to be looking at the impact on housing in that. So,
I mean, probably not, if I were to be really honest. It's not our responsibility to address the housing issues. I mean, I have to be really honest. We're in the business of education, and our priority is always education. So we have to solve problems around making sure we can keep the district fiscally solvent and deliver on the promise of education. That's our overarching goal. So looking at housing impact and that kind of a thing, I mean, we have to look at that in terms of demographer studies and the impact on our facilities and making sure we can educate kids. But it's not our job to solve, housing crisis outside of the schools. I mean, That's not our expertise. Now, do we think schools matter for housing? Absolutely. Do we think a high-quality school district that's fiscally solvent and has good academic programs matters to attract people to come live here? Absolutely. It's probably parents are shoppers, right? And so we understand the value of having a school system that has options to offer. You know, but we have to also pay attention. It's a balance of paying attention to that and paying attention to the finances. I'm going to take 2 more questions and then I'm going to move on, because if not, we're not going to get to the 7-Eleven. So right down the center here.
Hi, I just have 2 quick questions about
Sure.
the new budget that Gavin Newsom proposed.
Mhm.
You had mentioned that there was an increase in special education expenses for the district, and he allocated $696 million for students with disabilities, which is an increase of 21%. Does the district get any money for that, or does that offset the expenses for your district?
She's Newsom's bump in special education.
Yes, we're looking at that. A lot of that is for preschool type of programs, so as far as I know, but we've not seen the details behind it yet.
This was specifically for students with disabilities.
Right, but it's targeted for preschool, so.
Very big on preschool and early.
I understand that, but we're targeted for that, so that may actually be an increase to the district. So, I mean, an increase in more students in special ed. So we need to really, but I haven't really seen the details, they're not really out yet. The trailer bill just passed today, so we'll have to get some more data on that.
Okay.
But we're hopeful, just so you know, we're hopeful that it helps us. We're hopeful, but we're not sure.
And then there was an increase in local control funding. Did that help the district?
Well, we mentioned that up here of this 3.26, it was a COLA, 3.26%, and then there was actually some little help on pensions. Those are the 2 things that happened in the budget. So there's things are better than, but they're not. Just let me make one major comment. The California school finance declined dramatically in 1979 after Prop 13. It's still exactly at that level today. It has not changed in 40 years, just so be clear.
Okay, in the back, this is the last one. I'm going to move on to 7-Eleven.
I know obviously everyone here knows that there are many people that really love the small neighborhood schools that they are here
Yes.
to pay for tonight. Our family's kind of on the flip side of that. We're in a neighborhood with a big school that we don't really feel provides the same kind of education that some of these smaller schools do.
Okay.
And so we've been thinking, okay, we'll send our kids to one of these great small schools, but now that's looking like less of an option. And so I'm just wondering if, given that the financials are still struggling a bit, even with the closure of 2 schools, will there be room in that budget to improve the larger schools for all of these people that would potentially be sending their kids there? Is that something that has been looked at?
Yeah, so the question is obviously, let's see if I can quickly summarize it. The comment is that this constituent lives in an area where there's a bigger school, is concerned, you see potentially a quality issue, and that you were hopeful about sending your child to one of the smaller schools, and now with the information we're laying out tonight, you're feeling like you have less hope around that. So now the question is, if schools are closed, will that help improve some of the larger schools that kids will fold into? So the goal is to improve the overall academic programs of all of our schools. And so that's part of staying fiscally stable and fiscally solvent. When a school district is financially unstable and on the cusp and living in this world, they're usually not doing transformational things academically. They're usually surviving in terms of academic program, and they're not able to dramatically improve the quality of the educational program. So people have asked me, I'm a former elementary principal, I was a former elementary teacher. I came up the curriculum and instruction side. In preparation for the superintendency last year, I happened to get my chief business official certification. I spent a year in school to take his job, although I never won it. And you could, I would have never anticipated having to put it to use the way I have this year. But the only reason I bring that up is because a new superintendent of schools has to spend time in facilities and finance and make sure that we're managing our resources really well if we want to be able to get to the curriculum and instruction, educational and academic improvements. So that's my goal. I have a track record of improving educational outcomes for kids to scale. But I know I can't do it if I'm constantly in a crisis around facilities and finance. So we need to stabilize on the F&F side, facilities and finance side, not tossing any additional F's in there. And there's the sense of humor, Norm. And then shift to, okay, we've stabilized the budget. Now how do we improve the overall quality of all of our schools through a whole variety of efforts that the district can adopt. But we're really not in a position to have that conversation yet because we're living kind of in this world. Okay, so the budget recommendations must be implemented. I wanted to honor the comment that surfaced from someone over here around, well, if it's in the budget, that means the decision's done. So is this all kind of what might feel like a dog and pony show? And I don't work like that. We did build in, we didn't say in the budget 2 schools are closing. We did reduce overall administrative and operational costs, and implicitly that assumes some consolidation of campuses, okay? So that's what, now, if the 7-Eleven committee makes a recommendation and it comes to the school board and the school board doesn't decide to enact that, it just means that we have to choose other things. That's what it means. I mean, the numbers are the numbers, and I've done my homework around the numbers. I mean, people can talk to me about the numbers. I'm willing to hold public meetings around it. I'm real comfortable. I wasn't comfortable 6 months ago, but I'm comfortable today. I know where we're at. I'm very clear where we're at, and I know it's my job to solve the problem and lead through that solving that problem. So, it's important for us, if it's not that tactic or strategy, we'll have to pick others. And the ones that generate things like $1.5 million a year is don't take 1% off the teachers and the administrative salary. That's where you get numbers like that. You don't get it by, saving, buy less paper here or buy less books there. That's not how you get to those numbers annually. Recurring, you get to those numbers by making some big decisions. So if it's not consolidating campuses, it could be, well, we're not going to be competitive in terms of salary. Okay, fine. I have to talk to the Teachers Association, the classified union, my administrators. You have to raise potentially class size all over the district. That's the other way you get there, is class size is another quick way to generate or decrease expenses annually, year after year. And then a third way is just starting to cut just cut programs. You just cut programs. So, and you say we have less sections of this. You start looking at your high schools have lots of programs, so you just start cutting programs. It's not about saving here, saving here. We're talking about not just a one-time experience. We're talking about, in order to get out of this sort of reality, you have to make structural changes that annually will change that expenditure revenue flip that the organization has been living and breathing for the last few years. So it's not in the budget. I don't want anyone to feel like, oh, it's already decided. It is a recommendation as one strong way to get to this structural deficit issue. And if it's not that one, it'll just be one of the other ones that I named. So we're assuming that we will enact some courageous decisions, some tough decisions. They're the most challenging decisions a superintendent and the school board can make. But we know we need to make them, or we will we'll go under 3%. So tonight, this is all the stuff we've talked about. I think everything on here mostly. The only other one I'll comment on that has not surfaced in this very rich dialogue with all of you is I talked about compensation, we talked about special education, we talked about pension. One thing to know is that when a school district has low reserves, guess what? It's hard to borrow money. This is just like your own credit worthiness as an individual. school districts have a credit rating. When the creditors see that our reserves are low and depleting, then guess what? It costs money to borrow. And many school districts, it's not because we're in trouble, but many school districts have to borrow money during the course of the year to cover costs. Why? Because of the disbursement of the dollars to us. There's a huge gap between the two disbursements, December and April, right? It's tethered around, it's associated with the property tax time, okay? And we usually don't, if we don't have a reserve, we have to borrow cash to cover expenses until we get our disbursement from the state. Does that make sense? So we have to borrow more with a low reserve because we don't have the cash to get us from point A in time to point B in time. And when you've got a low reserve, guess what? It's more expensive to borrow. So the school district has been, Paul just experienced with our consultant a third time that we've been downgraded in the last 2 years, which means that now it's expensive. So that's additional pressure on the budget. Another reason and another motivation to get the reserve to be healthier again. Okay. All right. I took your questions, right? No more questions. Okay. So now we're going to talk to you about the process of school consolidation. Did I publish this meeting till 8 or 7:30? I can't remember. 8. Oh, good. I remembered that 90 minutes is never enough. Okay. So Paul is going to walk us, Dr. DeSario is going to walk us through the process for school consolidation.
So I go back a long time in school finance, and there, way back a number of years ago, the legislature passed a bill telling school districts how to close schools, because there were so many school closures back in the 70s and 80s for the same reasons we have today. So basically, there's an ed code. It says that the Board of Education, will appointed by the board to make recommendations to the superintendent about school consolidation. The committee, in this case, will be known as the 7-11 committee, and I'll get to the reason for that an acronym in a moment. But their main goal of gather facts, so a lot of people already mentioned facts, decide which schools are school to close, recommend this closure and or consolidation, and then recommend disposal of the surplus property if the board acts upon the recommendations. The meetings are open meetings. They're subject to the Brown Act, and so they're not going to be in a closed room. Anybody can come to the meetings, watch the proceedings, and make comments and requests to that committee.
So is that clear? Open public meetings, subject to the Brown Act, which means that they'll have public comments.
Yes, so there'll be a public comment at the beginning.
Like at a school board meeting,
right?
Okay. So when I said about space for input, that's space.
And before we get to questions, let's see if we go through a few more slides. We may answer your question, but we'll certainly come back to you. So here's the membership. This is again in Ed Code, and you probably can't see it, so I'll summarize it. We want an ethnic and age group, socioeconomic composition. The suggestions are somebody from the business community, landowners or renters, teachers, administrators, parents, and people with expertise in environmental, legal areas, building codes, et cetera, so that we get a cross-section. The 7 comes from the minimum number is 7, the maximum number is 11. So there can be no more than 11. We don't want a 30-person committee on this. On the other hand, we want some representation, so 7 is out. That's why it became 7-11 committee. The district will be accepting applications for this in the near future. We're going to have an application process on the website.
Yeah.
Okay.
We'll make announcements around that, so it'll be clear when applications are
And
being taken.
you don't have to take pictures. We're going to post this.
Yeah, but we're going to.
We're welcome to take pictures,
You're
but
welcome to take them, but we'll have a PDF available right on the district's landing page if you want all this. What was I going to say?
Per school or per
No.
process?
this will be a district-wide committee, and it will look at all the different aspects of school closure.
It's one committee.
And so this is a tentative schedule, and we're thinking 4 meetings. The first meeting would be an election of officers and presentation of information by the staff, and then the next 2 meetings would essentially be data presentation and committee review. I'm sorry, and yes, ma'am. Yeah, and the committee completion report to the superintendent and the board, and that would be at the 4th meeting. Now, if there are more meetings required, then we would have more meetings. If it turns out that that's not exactly, that doesn't work. My experience in the last time I've been through this, 4 meetings seemed to work okay. The officers are critical, particularly the chair of that committee is a very critical position, and so if some of you serve on the committee, electing a good leader as chair will be very important.
Can I say one thing?
Yes.
Thank you, Paul. So this is our general timeline, August to October, and I'm just going to be very clear and honest. It's tentative right now, but that's kind of our plan. That's where we are today in this preliminary phase of planning, because we have not detailed all of the work. I know you might say, well, why'd you hold this meeting without having all the detail ready? You know, there's a lot of things going on in the district. Right now, our goal was getting that budget done and submitted to the school board, which just happened this week. We were closing schools. And not closing schools, I mean closing like the school year. Bad choice of words there, I'm sorry. Yeah, that was a real slip. Ending the school year. And so now, right now with school ending, last board meeting of the year on Thursday, Mike, myself, Dominic, Paul, we will start the work, the development, the scoping and sequencing of the work and how it's going to pace out. And as details become more solidified, we're committed to sharing them. But we didn't want to wait for that. We wanted to go ahead and hold the community meeting and get people to start asking questions. Oh, so August is our date to launch. August is our date.
You have a question?
I was just wondering, I mean, 3 months seems like a pretty short time period as to
Yes, and I think one of the issues was open enrollment, so that if your school is closed, you would get a priority to open enroll to the schools. We want to do it quickly, so you can do that in the Christmas time range.
No, I understand that, but has there been given any thought about perhaps, deferring this decision, convening the committee now and doing a thorough process to make it a very informed decision and then
I think you'll find that this process will be very thorough that we're proposing.
And this is the process. It's not, I mean, a district can go on for 2 years, but the 7-11 process is, it's a series of meetings. There's a proposal on the table. It's based on data. It's not meant to go on for a year or 2 years. It's just not typical practice. Now, are there districts that do that? Absolutely. Could the district do that? Yes, but like I go back to the finances, we're not in a position to entertain ideas over the course of 3 years. We're at a point that there was a past point for that. That's not the point that we're in today. So it'll be deep dives, and we'll do the work as delineated in Ed Code. Yeah.
I just want to make sure, so if someone not chosen for the committee didn't mention that these are Brown Act meetings, but will all of the documentation and data that they're presenting be
All public. It's all public.
hasn't always been the case, so
Oh, yeah.
not with 7-11, but with some other potential issues in the past.
Yeah, everything will be public, yeah.
All committees and meetings that are subject to the Brown Act follow the law.
Okay. That's President Hurtado, anything that followed the Brown Act requirements, that has happened here in the school district. We have no reason to believe that they have not. Yep.
Let's see if we can get through some more. We may answer your questions in a minute.
Just, yeah, and let us just get, it's just like 2 or 3 more slides, and then we're opening up for questions, okay? So let us get through the content.
So these are some of the data points we'll be using, and you already talked about all of them tonight, so it's not a big surprise, but we'll be using enrollment data, attendance data, financial data, and any other data that people request. So for example, if somebody comes to the committee and says, we would like to know about a boundary, for example, or we want to know about the facility, another facility, or we want to know these, we'll gather whatever we can and provide that to the committee. Most recently, we did have, and maybe we can even make it available, there's a report from another district. They could look at it. So, I don't know, many, many pages long with all the kind of data you have on it. So, and then we'll certainly want to model that. And so the other things the committee can do is visit the schools, meet with the staff who've already experienced consolidation, other districts that have experienced consolidation. So the committee can do pretty much what it needs to do within the time frame and try to get as much information as it can and actually take a look at the sites. Maybe members of that committee have not been to your school. Want to make sure they do.
So I think it's important to delineate that in this situation, there's two functions of the 7-Eleven committee. Phase one of the 7-Eleven committee, well, I'm not going to phase it because it'll kind of probably happen in those series of meetings, but they will first have to identify, based on the data analysis and some of these additional activities, they'll have to say, what schools are we going to recommend for closure, right? So that's kind of a step one. That same committee then makes the decision around what to do with the property. So I think there was a question that I promised I'd get back to, or yours, now you're over here. Yeah, thank you. I'm not losing my mind totally. She moved. So that's the second wave of decision making. Then the 7-Eleven committee makes a recommendation around what to do with what's called the surplus property after the school closure recommendation has been made.
So, did you just do this slide? So basically, again, it will be, there are two functions. The schools will be consolidated and disposition of the property. And the reason to kind of link them together, there are a couple of reasons. You mentioned charter schools. We don't want a charter school coming in and maybe taking that property, so we'd want to dispose of it in some fashion, or maybe put it into reuse. And then the second point is that just moving, if the property is to be sold, it takes a long time to go through the process. This will help the process speed up. We're scheduled for October of 2019 for the conclusion, again, back to the constraint of open enrollment.
That comment regarding the charter schools, so I don't think Dr. Cesario was speaking specifically here. I mean, it is typical when there are school consolidations for a current charter to potentially acquire or be moved into a now available facility. His reference is some school districts find themselves with declining enrollment, lots of vacated properties because schools were consolidated, and then all of a sudden new charters are popping up because they see the facilities vacancy in the region. I know that's really happened in the Oakland Unified School District, where every open facility has been picked up by a charter school. So sometimes when you have all that, empty facility, then that ends up happening in a school district, which then feeds into declining enrollment because charters are expanding, which means less kids are in the district. So that was a general statement around when you do school closures. That's something that school districts pay attention to, not just leaving a bunch of empty properties vacant with no future determined in terms of facilities. I think that's it. Okay, whoa. Okay. No, I'm going to take a bunch of them here. Okay, go ahead, and we'll loop around.
I was wondering, how is it decided where the students from the schools that do close, where they'll be routed to?
Yeah, so we'll be looking at all the boundaries, and then they'll be told essentially this is potentially your new home school, right? Because we have to adjust boundaries once you close a school. So the question is where will the new students be, where will students be routed to? Like, how do you determine that? So there's obviously some boundary work that gets done in this process, but then families also, because we're an open enrollment district, get to exercise their right to open enrollment. So the idea typically, and that's kind of our tentative plan right now, and I'm just saying tentative because nothing's been put down on paper, but the spirit of the work for us is that if we're going to enact a closure and impose a closure on a community, that we would want to work with them in advance of the broad-based merit-based open enrollment process and give them some priority. Does that make sense? So that's our intent. Okay, here.
When it comes to the selection of the committee, are those teachers and parents from those 4 schools not eligible because they have a special interest?
So the question is, when it comes to the selection of the committee, are the parents of the potentially impacted schools not allowed on the committee because they might be perceived as having a special interest?
No, that's not true. It could be any parent or any teacher, any administrator in the district. It just depends on how they're selected. So we would not exclude people from those 4 schools that you were notified.
Okay, here.
Is there a way to maybe, thank you. Is there a way to maybe show the banks that in good conscience that we're making efforts and maybe slow the process down and maybe start with just 1 school and then see how that goes, see if that puts revenue back in the pockets and eases the financial strain a little bit, and then in another year kind of see if we really do need to close the 2nd school?
The question, is that possible? Sure, it's possible. But right now, we'd have to do, yeah, of course, the 7-Eleven committee could make that recommendation. Again, like, I don't have any predetermined path around this. The 7-Eleven will run its authentic process, and they might make that recommendation. 1 school this year, and another school the following year. However, me and the school board will face some decisions because, like I said, there is pretty much a $1.2, $1.3 million assumption in there that we're going to be able to collapse some operational and administrative costs. So it just means like, okay, well, if we didn't do that, what other thing are we going to do? Yeah. Can you talk to the mic?
Yeah. I'm a public school teacher here, and my kids are in private school. My question is, couldn't the question be, we're going to close your school unless you decide to become an independent charter? Because we have, from the other night, people at Mount George, which is the school I want to see stay open, because for various reasons, many reasons, they were saying, well, we'll put our kids in private school. My kids are in private school because I didn't want them to go to public school here, even though I'm a public school teacher here, mainly because of the middle school situation before River got its own campus. So I want to see Mount George stay open at any cost, whether it's a part-time principal or just saving money somewhere, because I think it's a magical school. So can't there be other ways to find this revenue?
So you kind of have it, there's a lot in there. So can they become a charter school? Well, there's a whole process to having to develop a charter. They'll have to deal with the financial component of all that, looking at cost of all that, and probably have to consider all the things that I described earlier without repeating all the things that charters are having to face right now. So that's not like, oh, let's just become a charter school tomorrow.
But if they're raising $100,000 a year in the gala, right? That those parents might have the means to keep that charter going.
But a charter school means the cost of every teacher, the cost of all the rent, and the cost of every operational cost and every employee. So that's awesome. I love that we have $100,000, and we know that in the past there's been discussions around, and I'll be really honest, I know with Yountville there was this, we'll provide some funding, we'll write $40,000 check or a $50,000 check. We are not talking numbers of 100,000. We're talking, we're talking millions here. You can look at the River budget. You can look at the Napa Valley Language Academy budget. So, yeah, parents have choice. If there's, charter as an option, there's a whole process to that dictated in Ed Code. It's not our job to put that offer on the table. That's just not how it works. So, okay, I'll start repeating because if I get out of camera frame here. Yeah, talk really loud. Yeah.
Is that based on the recommendation of the school board of the 3 small schools, or are all schools on the table? And by the fact that, so that's, I guess, my question. And why are we just focused on one element of these 3 schools?
There's 4.
4 schools, sorry, 4, based on one data point of 300 students. I understand that can be significant, but there can be other points that are saving money, you know, again, where that school is financially making more money or bringing in more money than another school. So kind of two questions. One is 7-11 committee, is it open to all schools or just based on the 4 schools that the school board or whoever is making the recommendation?
Yeah, so we'll be, you don't have to worry about that right now. I know how to do it if I need to. I can be my own tech support. But thank you. I know what to do if I need to, if we need to go back to the presentation. I think Dr. Desario mentioned it. If the 7-11 committee says, we want information on another campus, that is possible. We are going to make the recommendation that the 7-11 committee start with the 4 smallest elementary schools, because that's what makes most sense when you're looking at school consolidation.
So I guess I'll repeat your answer to make sure I understand.
Okay.
Correctly. The 7-11 committee is formed to look at all schools, and they can choose what schools to look at, or is their task to look at the schools given to them by the school board?
The latter, and not the school board by staff. The school board comes in at the end. The school board comes in and votes on the recommendations brought forth by the 7-11 committee. So staff is making a recommendation. The recommendation is, we have a financial issue, we need to consolidate some schools, right? Thus, the process is to erect or implement a 7-11 committee. We go ahead, staff will facilitate that process. We bring forth the 4 schools, the what and the why, and then the school board comes in at the end, because that committee makes the recommendations, and then the board votes on the recommendations of the 7-11 committee. The board does not really get involved before then in that way.
I mean, I guess I'm not understanding. My question is the 7-11 committee can look at all the schools in the school district?
Sure.
Okay.
If they decide to do that. We as staff will be making a recommendation that to focus the work, what makes most sense is to look at your 4 smallest schools. I think like Dr. Desario said, if the committee says, we want to look at these other 3 campuses and we want information on it, it's staff due diligence to come and bring the information that is being asked by the committee. But we're going to start with an orientation towards the smaller schools, because that's what makes sense in terms of boundaries and moving kids. That's what makes most sense. That's what's most efficient. Yep.
So my question really follows from the constituent over there who said that she would like to have the option to send her children to smaller schools. One of the ladies earlier on last week made the point that these small schools are higher performing in terms of children's attainment. And also, in the case of some of these schools, the cost per child is lower than some of the larger schools. Some of the larger schools have poor performing, and they may be poor performing because people are starting with English as a second language. They may be performing poorly because of a lower economic demographic. It also seems to me that these smaller schools, by and large, have a higher parent engagement, and also they are more affluent. The lady over there mentioned that $100,000 was raised by Mount George Parent Club. I'm sure Yountville raises a goodly sum as well. Now, when you expand these smaller schools by closing a large, poor-performing school with a higher cost per student, surely those children going to these smaller schools that are performing well, that have an engaged community, those dollars raised by the more affluent parents and businesses get to benefit a larger group of people. And the district school scores go up as a result per child, not go down. If you close these smaller schools, the affluent parents will take their children and put them into private school, losing 2 things. 1, funding from the state and the local authorities, and secondly, the direct contributions that affluent parents and businesses make to those schools. And therefore, I think the 7-11 committee should be looking at the entire portfolio of schools in the district.
Yeah, so
understanding of this budget crisis does need to be solved, and you have my every sympathy. But it seems like there's been mismanagement in the past, and the children of today are going to be having to pay those overdue bills. So I believe we should be making fiscal sound decisions, but we should be making those decisions basis not just small schools. It needs to be opened up to consider all schools.
yeah, so I think something to think about, I think what you're advocating for is school consolidation and closure based on student performance.
No,
Actually, let me finish, because I let you speak. Implicitly, that's an implication in what you're stating, because when you say things about larger, lower performing versus smaller, higher performing, and then you lay on top of that the things that you so eloquently described, socioeconomics, English learners, we could even get to racialized, because we do have some segregated schools, so that's just, I'm going to name it for what it is. Essentially, you're tethering, I think what you're describing is that a lot of variables go into student performance. A lot of variables go into student performance outside just size of school. So, to just look at student performance as the potential mechanism, which is how that can easily get translated, would be very problematic, because we do have students with higher needs, and many of our higher needs students who may be English learners, who may be more socioeconomically disadvantaged, are concentrated in particular schools. And often there are more hurdles or challenges to overcome in order to attain the same educational outcomes that you might feel proud of at a smaller, higher performing affluent school. So it's a very, very complicated issue, and we're going to look at it based on the data points that I described. Financials, facility, enrollment. You're describing a situation where keeping a school open, there might be 400 kids in an attendance area. And then there might be 40 in an attendance area. When you start opening it up wide, then there starts to be some major implications. Like, well, why would you shut down a school where there's 400 kids for which that may be a neighborhood school? Because of performance? That's usually not the best practice enacted by school districts. They're really usually looking at this from a facilities and financial angle. But I appreciate your commentary and understand your stance. Okay, I'm going to loop here to my PTO president, or no, treasurer, I'm sorry.
So I guess I sort of in comment to that, I want to clarify that we raised $100,000 not because we're all really rich. It's because we work really hard. So we do have a more socioeconomically advantaged school than my home school, which is Phillips. But we are not a bunch of rich people. And I feel like I need to say that as a preface to the question I was going to ask, which is that I'm wondering for the 7-Eleven committee, what is the source of the data that they're getting? Because I do feel that often Mount George and some of the smaller schools are characterized by the district as these little rich white enclaves of people who want to keep everybody else out. And that isn't really what we are at all. I mean, I think that we would in fact love to have more students, and we would certainly love to be supported with some of those ESL options that we have not had, and some of the other aids and things that have been cut, the things that the PTO pays for because the district has taken them away. Like, we would love to be bigger and not so tiny. And so I want to know if the district is coming at this information from the assumption that we're a certain kind of school at a certain size and a certain cost, and then they're delivering that information to the 7-Eleven committee, from which the 7-Eleven committee is supposed to decide which schools should be closed. Who else is bringing information to the 7-Eleven?
So it is staff, and they're public meetings. They're agendized, the material's public. So if we happen to be providing demographic data that misrepresents your school, I would expect somebody to call my office about that. Because the intent would be that we would provide demographic data that is truly reflective of the socioeconomic levels of the schools, the race of the schools, everything that you find. I think somebody was referring to the SARCs, all the things that is available via the California Department of Education. So we're not going to characterize it one way or the other. I hear your concern around the way the schools get characterized in the community, and I can appreciate your vantage point on that.
I just want to be very specific. The district has said to me
Okay, or the school district.
that,
What have they said?
that we're rich, that we're a rich school, and I guess it's all relative, like
Right.
certainly compared to some other schools.
Sure.
But we're a solidly middle class school, and
Sure.
we have a few lucky people, and we have people who aren't as lucky, and we try to support
Sure.
all the kids with all the stuff. That's what we're here to do.
Yeah.
I don't like the characterization that, oh, these are just rich people,
Yeah. No, we know you're working really hard over there, all your parent engagement efforts, and we want to honor that and recognize that. For us, in terms of the 7-Eleven space and just the way I work, we'll just be looking at the data. I mean, it's very clear on who's reporting and what the socioeconomic levels are at the school. That's the data that we will be reporting. It's not, we don't add sort of narrative beyond that. They'll look at that data. And my apologies if you've heard from previous administration or district staff that has made you feel a particular way through that characterization. That's not our intent, but we will look at the demographics, and it will show, like I think you put it in juxtaposition, Mount George to Phillips. There is a dramatic difference between the free and reduced lunch levels between those two schools, and that's just that's a fact. So it is what it is, and we'll look at the data as it is what it is, and that's really all we can do. But I appreciate your comment. Yep, I'm going to loop around right here. You've been waiting patiently. I've seen that hand up there the whole meeting, I think.
Mallory Macedo, I was here last week.
Yes, yes.
One of my questions is actually in response to the commentary earlier about, you had mentioned, housing not our primary concern. Understandably, I totally empathize with what you've taken on. But you also mentioned that parents move to Napa based on their research ahead of time. And these are four of the highest top performing schools. So are we taking into consideration that by closing 2 of the highest top performing schools, we are going to lose enrollment by those choices?
It is a possibility. Yeah, absolutely. And there's that's a possibility. And we know that, and we're aware of that. We know parents have choice. I think it's been named here that parents will choose private schools. But that's a lot of ifs and ands and possibilities, because every individual family will have to leverage their choice options for them and their children. We do have to, unfortunately, look at financial stabilization and make the decisions based on that. And then we will have to sort of see where the chips fall in terms of how many people continue to stay with us or potentially leave, because parents have choice. And we encourage parents. We understand that families need to make the choice that's best for them. I'm a big advocate of that and understand that fully.
And so my second part, I appreciate your response. Second part of my question, how is this committee being decided? There's 7 to 11 people.
Mm-hmm.
So I saw the demographics of, store managers, parents, teachers,
Yep.
et cetera, but how are we deciding? Because I can guarantee that more than 11 people in this room
Yeah.
are going to step forward to be
I'm going to have a lot of applications from folks in the room.
You as the district, or whoever else on the board.
Do you want to talk to that?
That those 11 people are the right fit.
So I'm going to bring our professional expert who does 7-Elevens, who will talk about that a little bit, Dominic.
First of all, thank you so much for giving me the opportunity to talk here. This is wonderful to see the community output. I myself have been an elected official. I've been a city council member 2 terms in the city of Fremont. My dad was in the state legislature, so love the input. I just want to set the context. for how decisions like these are made as mandated by the state. The 7-Eleven is a group, as Paul has noted, a minimum of 7 and no more than 11, and they are, applications will be put out to the community. You'll have an opportunity to fill out an application. Of course, it's very, very difficult to make decisions within the context of large groups. And that's why the state, this is not something that the school district itself has said, we're going to do this independently and this is just the way we think this should be done. The state has said these are such important decisions, school closures, what happens with these properties, that we want to set up a process that is mandated on the superintendent in the district, and that is the establishment of the 7-Eleven group. So the applications will be brought in, they will be reviewed by staff, and they will be brought to the board, and the board ultimately will make a decision because, of course, there's only 11 people. I can guarantee you that, to your point, there will be 11 people on that, and there will be some alternates. In addition, remember, they are public meetings. So all the people who are not on that committee are going to have an opportunity to come and to share their perspectives. And I just want to say one last thing before I hand this back to the superintendent. I think this is such an important thing and I'm doing this right now. In fact, tomorrow I will be with Redwood City School District, who shut down 4 schools. I'm working with Oak Grove, who just shut down 4 schools. It's a very, very tough process. I will guarantee you, when a superintendent comes to a district, the first thing on their mind is, I just can't wait to have a community meeting and talk about school closures. But I will tell you, the easiest thing for a superintendent or a leadership group within a district would be to do nothing. And that itself is a decision. And they'll be there 3 or 4 years, and then they won't be there anymore. And I will guarantee you that problem will have gotten worse. What is really happening through the 7-Eleven process is it's a transitional process that the leadership is saying to the community, we have a challenge that we need to solve now. We are going to work with you through the establishment of the 7-Eleven committee. We want to get this set up as quickly as possible so we can address this issue, so we can work through a transitional process. Doesn't mean that the properties necessarily are going to go away. In fact, at Redwood City School Districts, none of them are going away. We're leasing those properties. We're garnering some income. We're staggering lease terms so that if enrollments go up in the future, or the superintendent can work with you and find an opportunity to resurrect those schools in ways that, in fact, are fiscally sustainable, that's going to happen. So what I would just encourage you, because so often these things, it's, oh my gosh, these schools going to go away and there's never going to be an opportunity. We don't know that, and the district superintendent, the superintendent here, I think, has made clear that there's no foregone conclusions. That's why the state has mandated that you are going to have an opportunity to be on that committee. We're going to go through a process. They've outlined a process of 3 or 4 meetings. It may go a little bit longer, but you will have an opportunity to decide. Do they get leased? Do they get sold? Which ones get closed? Because it's easy for, I'm sorry? That the 7-Eleven committee. So what is going to happen is, and the district staff, and superintendent, stop me if I'm going too far here, but staff is going to have the opportunity because they are hired to do that. When I was on the city council, I hired staff, and I expected them to be able to bring me information so that I can make good policy decisions. That 7-Eleven group is in effect going to be a city council or a school board, although it will be an advisory report. Ultimately, that's why you have to go through elections to be board members. They have to make the tough decisions. But you're going to have an opportunity, and what's going to happen is staff is going to come and lay out all the information to you. And they should tell you that you would feel that they were neglectful in their duties if they came to you and said, hey, what should we do? That just doesn't happen in districts. They spend their time trying to figure out plans, strategic plans, to fiscally get the district in a position where it's sustainable. Because if you're not fiscally sustainable, I don't care what your goals and objectives are on an education perspective, you just can't do it.
I don't think you've answered the actual question.
Go ahead. What was the question?
What are the selection parameters for the committee?
So the state has just outlined that there are simple demographic requirements that are required, and they are set up. If you look at them, there's teachers, there's real estate people, there's all different segments of the community. That is the only. So if we get 5 different real estate agents, 5 different teachers, 5 different members of each of these, there's not going to be a rating process. It's simply going to go to the board, and the district staff is going to say to the board, we've had 70 different applications, here they are, and the board is going to make a determination as to who is going to serve on that committee. And that is a state mandated process, not a district mandated process.
And will the positions be divided equally among the 4 schools?
That is not one of the processes that the district has discretion in that regard.
So we may not, Yountville may not even be represented.
That would be something that the board itself could take into account. So you, again, what would happen is you would be able to talk to your board members and go to the actual board meetings, and you'll have an opportunity to say, we think it would be most representative if, in fact, you have 5 different real estate people, because that's one of the categories, that knows land use issues, that in fact you have somebody that is representative of the various things, so they're not all concentrated around one school. And I think your board will, in fact, take that into consideration. Yes, sir.
I have a brief question. So it seems to me we've talked a lot about fiscal responsibility and cutting expenses. I get it. That makes perfect sense to me. However, what I haven't heard a lot of is what are ideas to keep the schools open aside from enrollment? Because that's what we keep hammering on is enrollment's going down, enrollment's going down. So because enrollment's going down, we're cutting. And we're not really painting a very rosy picture for the district. I mean, frankly speaking, it feels like a sinking ship.
Sure.
And I want to jump off of at any minute to go
Sure.
to a rosier school district.
Sure.
Just 20 miles up the street. Because they seem to have lots of money and they're not in the same situation.
Yep.
So explain to me as a parent who wants to send their kid to a school that's small because that's what my kid requires. And I imagine a lot of people's kids need that same thing. I mean, give me something that says, stick with us, because I heard your idea about what we need to be fiscally responsible before we can start investing. I'm sure you've been in education a lot longer than I've been exposed to this, and I gotta tell you, it doesn't seem to me that there's gonna be any improvement, because usually when people are talking cuts, there's not improvements. We're talking, how do we save money? Not how do we raise money? It seems like that's what we need, is more money. And the only way to get more money is by more enrollment. But if enrollment's going down, we're solving only half of the problem.
Yep. So, yeah, I've been in this predicament before, and have faced a structural deficit before. And so I'm well aware of, it is really challenging, I think Dominic said. I mean, probably the least favorable conditions for a year 1 superintendent is to have to come into a financial situation this precarious and then have to go to the topic of 7-Eleven committee and school closures. Nobody wants that. So trust me, if I had other options, I would explore them. But what I also know from my past professional experiences is a couple things, that financial turnarounds can be quick, and districts can quickly bounce back if they impose upon them some of the courageous and tough decisions that is required to eliminate a structural deficit quickly. And I've experienced that, and I know where it does become a long, less favorable process is actually where it's not self-imposed, but where it's imposed by the state. The recovery around that and the research around school districts that have found themselves in that situation actually shows that many of them find themselves in a perpetual cycle of ringing the financial fire alarm, because when it's from the outside, that means that they haven't changed the structural issues from the inside, and that they have the leadership who sees it, who can do it, who can mobilize internally and externally the community to get behind it, and they find themselves right back in the same situation. So I feel very blessed that I'm in a situation where we've identified the issue before we're in that set of circumstances, and I feel confident with the right decisions over the course of the next 2 to 3 years, we will be able to turn things around, and I will not be in this state of discussion, but rather in one that makes you feel as a parent more confident in its local public school district. So, we haven't talked about revenue generation. You're absolutely right, because we've been talking about reduction of expenses. By nature, school closures lean in that direction. But we will be launching a huge enrollment campaign. I have I have a 5-year experience where I turned enrollment around in a district half this size. It does mean some creative policy, some openness. It does mean adjusting what might be some past practices, like looking at creative, a little bit more tuning into inter-district policies. For example, you have a lot of people that commute into this valley for work who might be leaving their children behind, and maybe they want to have their children closer to them. So looking at policies where you could prioritize enrollment for inter-districts for folks that work in the valley, all kinds of ways to think about drawing people in. And we will do an assertive marketing campaign. It's hard to do amidst this information, but as things recover and get better and the school board makes some of the tough decisions, then we'll start to be able to market ourselves as a school district. And it's this work that, and I get it, because as the folks in this room, you see small schools as a program. That's like a reduction in program for you. So when I say things like we're trying to retain a lot of the academic programs through school consolidation, it lands for you differently. For you, that is a program, right? That is an academic program. And I'm hearing that, and we pick up on that. But the bottom line is we're doing some of the things that were described on the earlier slides in order to avoid gutting academic programs, gutting the robust. I mean, this is my 4th school district. You have very robust enrichment programs here at the high school level. You have, you have really stellar programming for public schools, for large comprehensive high schools here in Napa Valley Unified School District. So, you know, that's kind of where all our kids end up landing, but we do have to pay attention to how we make sure that our elementary families stay with us in our middle school. So we'll look at an enrollment campaign. We're going to centralize enrollment. I've gotten complaints from people in the room earlier in the fall around complaints around our current open enrollment process. I picked up a lot of dissatisfaction with that through my listening and learning tour in the fall. And I'll be developing a whole new enrollment infrastructure in the district so that people can enroll on one of these, on one of their smartphones. And I'm streamlining the process, so those things are happening in the background. And we're also looking at improving our facilities use. There's a lot of revenue that can be generated through appropriately charging entities for the use of our facilities. And so we're looking at that. That's another revenue stream for the district. And then ultimately, it's been named 3 or 4 times, a lot of school districts of our demographic that want to be able to retain programs, and you could throw small schools as a program, is passing parcel taxes. And that's what a lot of local public school districts do to preserve programming. There's not a parcel here. So.
Let me just follow on to that, because I have to educate me and maybe some of the parents in the school. I'm sitting here thinking to myself, I get the small school dilemma, which is they cost more money.
Yep.
But to speak with this gentleman over here, educate me on what are the issues about closing a giant school and redistributing all of those people to make all your small schools bigger.
Yeah, so I think something too that I haven't surfaced yet in that discussion is I can't make Mount George 600 kids. The footprint of these campuses, like this concept that I'm going to shut down a school that has the facilities potential of 500 to 600 kids to redistribute them to other campuses, is the footprint is a massive limitation of many of the facilities in the region. So you have to think of that too. I mean, well, there's a big differential in terms of square footage just of footprint, facility footprint. So this idea that close the big one and redistribute them to all the small ones, Yountville has a tremendous limitation in terms of facilities. Mount George has a tremendous, think about cafeterias, lunches. I mean, like there's a facilities constraint here that we have to pay attention to. So it can't be that simple of close the big school because of performance or whatever people's perceptions are and distribute them to the high performing places, because there's a lot of facilities constraints. I want you to talk to me about lunch at Mount George with 600 kids and a bunch of portables. You're no longer a small school, and you're going to have all kinds of overcrowding issues on a campus that has a facility footprint that small. So that's a variable that we haven't discussed, but it's a very real variable. Yep.
You're punishing, well, so discussed with the committee that had the bond funds for renovating schools, dealing with structural or earthquake issues. So we actually begged them to renovate our space so that we could have a real cafeteria. The committee that was in charge had wanted to give us a parent room instead of that. So that's kind of like a false narrative. We would gladly have taken the cafeteria to accept more students. Granted, we're not going to be a 600.
Yeah, but so we don't need to go down. I mean, the cafeteria is just one example, but the bottom line is the footprint of some of these schools is small. I mean, it's just a lot smaller. So that's my big picture point around that. I have to be really respectful. We're 25 minutes over, and I know there's some people in the room. So I'm going to take 2 more questions. We're going to end the meeting at 8:30. The slides will be made available via the district's website that you can have access to, and then we'll have some ongoing communication. I thought I had a slide there that was going to talk about next steps, but someone who hasn't spoken, how about you right there? Yep. So you're here on an inter-district transfer? Okay.
So my concern is obviously 2 schools are closing. So if Mount George is one, when I came into the district, I had to wait for Napa County to go through their open enrollment. I got the
Not Napa County, Napa Valley Unified School District.
Napa
Yep.
Valley Unified School District to get their kids picked out. Then I got to come in and get what was left. I got very lucky and I got Mount George and I cried. But now, is that going to be the same process when this happens? Do I get seniority to keep my daughter with her friends? And if they're all going to Alta Heights because they combined, do I still get to do that?
You're an inter-district transfer, so that's an anomaly situation. I'm happy to talk to you later. But inter-district transfers would potentially be different in all this, because it is the obligation of the school district to take care of district enrollees first. So I can't answer your question off the cuff without knowing kind of the landscape of how many inters and whatnot. The inter-district situation is an anomaly situation that we would have to handle separately, but you will definitely be engaged in that pre-open enrollment process simply because you're enrolled. And we don't want to lose inters, and so we'll work with families. Yep. Okay, I'm here, and then I'm ending the meeting. Yep.
So you're saying that our small schools are very low on enrollment, but at what point do you say to all the schools that are bigger schools, you say we cap at 500 and then we redirect those extra students to the smaller schools instead of, just making it bigger and instead of
Yeah, and I think what gets misunderstood in that point is the bottom line is that the Napa Valley Unified School District is setting aside like the spirit of small schools and the philosophy of small schools. I'm just going to put on my financial hat, my numbers hat on, okay? So, because I don't want it to land personally. But I think what the bottom line is that the Napa Valley Unified School District has too many elementary schools for the overall total number of students currently enrolled at the elementary level, right? Set aside the philosophy of small schools. Rerouting, once this big school gets to 500, and rerouting doesn't get to the problem. And what the problem is that NVUSD right now is operating too many schools for the amount of total elementary students we have, which is a decision we can make, but it's a costly one, and one that is challenging in the current financial landscape that I spent the first hour making. So.
We're going to be even worse because some of our kids from the small schools, they're not going to go into the bigger schools, but they're going to go private or they're going to go somewhere else.
That is a possibility. Yeah, that is a possibility, and it's all the weighing out of that, and then we might have to close more schools. I mean, that's just, unfortunately, that's the risk we run, but we don't know how many people it takes writing checks and filling out applications, all those kinds of things. We can't take someone's word. If 300 people say we're going to private school tomorrow, we can't operate on those unknowns. That's just not how we can do business as a public school district. So. Yeah, we might have a steeper decline, you're absolutely right. Yep, and we'll have to face that if that is what happens as a result of consolidation. But I don't have any guarantees on what that number is until I enact the process. Okay, last question. Okay.
It's not a question.
Okay.
Mine, I'm speaking for myself. I love my small school, but we've got 4 small schools that are at risk. Let's all come together and realize that we've overfilled this boardroom tonight. And if we all come together and we spread out, the other, how many schools? 15 schools? I don't know.
19.
The other 19?
Or not 19, 15. You're right. 15 plus a 4. Sorry.
Going to be better because we're going to be there.
Okay. On that note, I want to thank you. Look for ongoing communication. As the process unfolds, we'll stay in communication. Thank you for coming tonight.